everyone, Raelan here. I am back with Marsh. If you didn't see her first video, she was on the channel not too long ago sharing her story with CFS. She's come a long way with it, not fully towards full recovery, but made a ton of progress. So if you haven't seen that, I'll link it above. I highly recommend you check it out. But today, Anna has agreed graciously to do a part 2 to that video, to do a deep dive talking about our hormones and how that impacts our health and what can go wrong and what we can do about it and how we can manage things at different points in our life, in our cycles. So welcome back, Anna. Thank you so much for doing this again today.
It's such a pleasure. I loved our last interview, so more than happy to be back again and share some more with you.
So can you please tell everybody what your areas of specialty are in training? Because it is such a long list. I know I'm not going to get them all.
I know, we need like a long time, like half the show just to go through it. I'll try to keep it brief. I trained as a nutritional therapist. I did a master's in personalized nutrition, and then I've also done training with the Institute of Functional Medicine. So I'm a certified functional medicine practitioner. But I am also a self-professed study geek, so I'm always adding more and more strings to my bow in terms of all the things that I know and love to integrate into the way that I work. And a big thing for me, I think, is realizing how big stress and chronic stress and the nervous system impact our health. So I've done further training in coaching, neuro-linguistic programming, neurostrategies, trauma-informed, and I'm actually just next month, I'm going to start a 3-year training to become a somatic experiencing practitioner with the institute founded by Peter Levine, who's the author of Waking the Tiger or An Unspoken Voice. I don't know if you're familiar with those books, but really great books to read.
Incredible. And I think you just touched on the main ones because I've seen your website and that's not even a complete list of everything that you're knowledgeable in. So yeah, very grateful to have you here. We're very lucky to get to hear a bit more of your insights and knowledge on the topic of hormones. So I think a good place to start would just be, what does a healthy or typically functioning hormone cycle look like? And for people watching, we're going to be focusing primarily on women. Men, there might be little bits in there for you, but it's a lot of talk about the female hormone system today.
Yeah, female hormones are just so much more complicated than male hormones, so we definitely need more time for that today. But where I might begin is just saying that, even though if you're a woman, you've probably been menstruating for a good chunk of your life, it's actually amazing how little we know about our hormones. And the only reason why I know all of this stuff is because it's my job, but a lot of lay people just don't know. So it's really helpful just to start off by understanding what technically should be going on in your body each month if you are a menstruating woman. The cycle is broken down into 2 phases, and roughly to work through those 2 phases will take 28 to 35 days, depending on the woman. And we count day 1 from the first day that you bleed. So day 1, first day that you bleed, will also be the first day of what is known as your follicular phase. And this is the time of the month when hormones are generally low, and round about maybe day 9 or 10 or 12, hormones begin to rise. And typically what happens is estrogen peaks around about day 12 of the cycle, and that's what causes ovulation. So first half of the cycle is really about these lower levels of hormones. Estrogen has this big surge that triggers ovulation, and then we move into the second phase of the cycle, which is the luteal phase. So if we have a good estrogen surge, if we ovulate, we produce a little gland, which is called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum then releases the hormone progesterone. So now in the second half of the cycle, we have got estrogen and we've got progesterone. And that will generally last usually another 14 days. So once we've ovulated, we've got another 14 days. Those hormones will begin to taper off towards the end of the cycle, and then we have our next period. So I guess the key things to know are estrogen surge prior to ovulation. We have to ovulate to produce the corpus luteum, which means we have to ovulate to produce progesterone. No ovulation, no progesterone, and that can potentially be problematic. So that's kind of a key thing to remember. That cycle could be 21 days. So you could ovulate at day 7, and then you have your 14 days, and then you menstruate. or it could be as long as 35 days. So you may ovulate at 21 days, and then you have your 14 days, and then you menstruate on the 35th day, and so on. So it is variable. And what I find is most women have their norm, what's normal for them, whether that's 26 or 28 or 21 or 32. Most women are usually attuned to what's normal for them if they're paying attention. Obviously, some women just don't know.
I keep thinking the whole time you're talking, I know embarrassingly little about this topic to have gotten to this point in my life, and I'm going to have to watch this video a couple more times because that was a lot to take in. I'm like, wow, I really only am now just starting to grasp how little I know about my own body and hormonal cycle. So thanks for going through all of that detail. I've heard you talk about something, I mean, we're talking today, obviously, for anyone who's watching, the topic of my channel is typically around things around chronic fatigue syndrome or CFS and related conditions. So we're looking at, how this all interacts with our body when we're facing conditions like this. And I've heard you talk about something called the selfish immune system. So can you tell us what that is and what that means in terms of our hormones?
Yeah, so the selfish immune system is a concept I learned when I'm just laughing at myself now, when I did my psychoneuroimmunology training. So that was a 2-year diploma I did as one of my study geek escapades, learning about psychoneuroimmunology. And the lecturer I had on this course, his name was Leo Prembroom. He's actually published quite a lot of papers. He's in the evolutionary science realm, but just one of the most incredible minds. I just hang on every word he says. He's so knowledgeable, and everything he says makes so much sense. So he introduced me to this concept, which is the selfish brain and the selfish immune system. And really what it's based on is the theory that we have 4 kind of main places where our body likes to direct energy. And in a healthy system, the brain will be the dominating system. Then we maybe have the metabolic system, which will dominate if we go for a run or we do some exercise because we have to use our muscles. We have the immune system, which will dominate if we get a virus and we get the flu and we need to fight off the flu. Then all our energy gets directed towards the immune system and away from the brain and away from the metabolic system, which is why we feel foggy and tired and achy when we're ill, is because energy is being taken up by the immune system to fight that infection. And then the 4th place is the reproductive system, because the ovulation, which we talked about prior to ovulation, we need a big surge in estrogen. So there's like a lot of energy going into this estrogen surge so that your body can menstruate. And also menstruation, now the uterine lining is shedding, and there's a lot of energy going into that. And there's also a little bit of immune activity as well at that time, because if you ovulate and you were to become pregnant, the immune system has a very careful job of being active enough to prevent any sort of infection happening, but then also not too active that you would reject your own, egg that's trying to implant into your uterus. So there's kind of like a delicate balance around ovulation with the immune system and with the body's energetic balance. And then also at menstruation, there's inflammation which is being created to allow the shedding of the uterine lining. So it's quite like an energetic event. And so some women may notice very, very small changes around that time. But my personal experience, my experience working with clients and just general observations is that if there's already something going on in the body, like immune system which is more active than what it should technically be, it's generally taking up the lion's share of the body's energy, which means that it's taking energy away from the brain, away from the metabolic system, possibly away from the reproductive system, which can lead to then hormone imbalances, or maybe it's just making the symptoms around ovulation or the symptoms around menstruation much more heightened. So if there's a little bit of fatigue in a healthy person around menstruation, that fatigue may be much greater in somebody who has already got some pre-existing inflammatory condition.
So if someone is facing something like CFS and they are facing more symptoms during certain parts of their cycle, what could they do to mitigate those symptoms?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And one of the things I want to frame is that I like to see hormones as the volume control. So when hormones are fluctuating across a natural cycle, as they will, even a healthy person may feel different at different times of the cycle. But the volume is much louder in someone with ME/CFS because there's already some sort of inflammatory imbalance. So we want to think about two things. One is like, what are we doing just generally to support the ME/CFS? And then the other thing is, what are we doing to support hormones? And I would say more often than not, maybe there's two things I see. One thing is people are not ovulating. And that could be because there's inflammation, because there's stress. Sometimes blood sugar imbalances can prevent ovulation. Those would kind of be the top three, I would say. So we want to think in that person about managing stress, managing inflammation, managing blood sugar. Or the other thing which I see quite a lot is also estrogen dominance. And so that is for whatever reason. Sometimes people are more genetically susceptible, or sometimes people have problems with their detoxification systems, things like that. But they're just making a lot more estrogen than they are progesterone. And so if that's the case, estrogen can be a little bit pro-inflammatory. So it's kind of feeding into a lot of the immune activation and increasing those symptoms of inflammation. Then we really want to be thinking about like, how do we lower inflammation generally, and also how do we support estrogen clearance from the body. I've typically found with the symptoms I experience, there is a cyclical element to them. And in my second year of recovery, I was getting really, really terrible menstrual migraines. Like maybe day 3 of my cycle, I would just get a really bad migraine, really bad cramping on maybe day 1 or 2, very painful. And also what I call period flu, which is just, I guess, a heightening of those CFS-ME symptoms around about my cycle. And we kind of do want to think what's going on in the individual, because there's nuance and different people will maybe be experiencing different things for different reasons. But I've found personally what's worked well for me and what's worked well with clients is supplementing with something called GLA. And GLA is gamma-linolenic acid, and it is an omega-6 fatty acid that has an anti-inflammatory role in the body. And so when I've done my own red cell fatty acid testing, my GLA came up low. And when I've tested other clients, their GLA has come up low. I actually haven't seen a test yet with normal GLA. So it's helpful just to, if we're guessing, it's always just a good one. It's not harmful to supplement with. So it's always just a good one to take for a cycle or 2 and just see if symptoms improve. So that can potentially be a quick win. And then personally, things I found helpful is just antioxidants. So antioxidants are really beneficial in CFS-ME anyway. And so for me, just like a good quality multivitamin with a lot of fat-soluble antioxidants or vitamin C, extra antioxidants added in can be great. And I also really like glutathione, which is one of the body's major antioxidants, super important. It does many, many different roles in the body. When I've done my own testing, mine has been on the low side. I have seen it low in some clients, but not all clients. It is quite an expensive one, so it's one I don't usually like to recommend unless I've tested and it's justified.
Thank you for that. I think I mentioned before to you that I do have quite a few people reaching out to me asking, like, I really struggle. It's certain times of the month during menstruation. What do I do? Why is this happening? And I get those messages and I'm just, I have no idea. Which got me thinking, I'm wondering, because it sounds like, the symptoms or side effects of the different parts of our cycle can be amplified while we're facing something like ME/CFS. But can ME/CFS have an impact on the hormones and the cycle themselves? Because I think one of the reasons that I don't know much about this is that while I was unwell, for most of my life, my cycle was so irregular. I could go sometimes 6 months without menstruating. So it just wasn't something that I was paying attention to. And interesting enough, when I finally recovered, I never did anything knowingly, purposely to fix my hormones. But once I was recovered, everything was perfect. Like my whole cycle, everything just started in my 40s for the first time in my life, have this sort of perfectly functioning system. So can things like ME/CFS throw that out of whack?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say to be having a perfectly functioning system in your 40s is awesome because usually most women get to 40 and then everything goes haywire. So well done you. The second thing, well, in short, to answer your question is yes. And so often when I'm working with clients who don't even have ME/CFS, but they just have hormone imbalances, what I'm doing with them is just helping their whole body become healthier. So if we were to assume that there's some imbalance going on in ME/CFS, whether that is a dysregulated nervous system, a dysregulated immune system, high amounts of inflammation, all of those things are probably going to be the consequence of an unhealthy system. And if the system is unhealthy, that's going to exacerbate the hormonal balance. There are sometimes specific things we can do to modulate hormones, and I would say that's the cherry on top. And that's maybe what I had just mentioned before about the GLA and the multivitamin and the glutathione. Those are like the cherries on top. But really for hormonal balance, it's all the things we'd be wanting to do for CFS-ME anyway. Like manage the inflammatory environment, manage stress, make sure someone's blood sugar is balanced, make sure someone's got the nutrients that they need, their diet is good. So there's a lot of kind of across the board general health advice, which I would say is a foundation for a healthy body and healthy hormones. And then we can get into the nitty gritty, and some people, maybe because they are genetically susceptible, may need those extra little tweaks.
It's very interesting, and it's because when I first became unwell with ME/CFS, and my doctor, I explained that my cycle was so ridiculously out of whack, so we started trying to target that, and I was doing some hormone replacement therapy, and that never seemed to help. It didn't regulate things, but it's still a little bit of that, I think, outdated way of thinking about health, where we just like it's a car, and we're just trying to fix all the separate broken parts individually. And that never really was effective for me. Now, things like hormone replacement therapy may be very effective for some other people in different instances, but for me, it didn't seem to do much. So it's just interesting that this as well seems to fall into that same approach of just overall supporting the body's overall health and healing an immune system and thriving, and then things start to regulate. Because when people ask me, how did you fix this and how did you fix that? I don't have specific answers for a lot of the things. It just all kind of slowly started falling into place as I got healthier.
Yeah, and I'm a strong believer in that as well. Functional medicine is about looking at how the systems all integrate with one another. But I also believe that there are universal, across the board principles for health that we kind of want to have as a foundation. And then, yes, maybe you need a specific supplement for your brain, or you need to do some extra stuff for your gut, or whatever is going on specifically for you. But I believe those kind of very tailored, specific things work best when we've laid a solid foundation.
So, I mean, we're talking a bit about this already, about what can go wrong, but are there other things that can impact our system and how it's functioning, our cycle and so forth?
So what I just wanted to touch on actually was we talked about not ovulating, and I suspect that was what was happening for you all those months and years when you just didn't have a cycle, is you weren't ovulating, and maybe because your stress levels were high, maybe because your body was very inflamed, we will never know, but you weren't ovulating, and therefore you probably weren't producing very little progesterone, and that could be feeding into your symptoms because the only hormone you may be producing is estrogen, and that's the estrogen dominant state. But I'd like to actually talk about the opposite of that, which is low estrogen, because you mentioned hormone replacement therapy, and depending on how old someone is in their ME/CFS journey, if someone is perimenopausal or postmenopausal, maybe their estrogen levels are going to be low, and there can be some other things which would potentially impact symptoms. So there's just a couple of mechanisms, and I'm just going to warn you, this might get a little bit sciencey. This is my inner geek coming out. One of the mechanisms is that when we are making our sleep hormone melatonin and our happy hormone serotonin, we're making those hormones from an amino acid, which is called tryptophan. And sometimes when there is inflammation in the body, what happens is tryptophan gets a little bit lost. It's supposed to be going off to make, the happy hormone and the sleep hormone, and it just goes the completely other direction, and it creates pain and inflammation instead. So it's kind of not ideal. It's not what we want. And estrogen can have an impact on that. So estrogen can be a factor which influences the decision making with tryptophan. Am I going to go this way and do the good thing, or am I going to go that way and do the bad thing? And so if estrogen is low, tryptophan could, in a genetically susceptible person with inflammation, go off and create more pain and inflammation. And this is where I think people need to be very careful, because a lot of people supplement with 5-hydroxytryptophan because they think it's going to help with their mood and it's going to help with their sleep. But if that internal environment is wrong, it can kind of go, down the wrong pathway. This means that if someone has low estrogen for whatever reason, maybe they're transitioning towards menopause or they're postmenopausal, or even for myself, I find that the beginning of my cycle, I don't feel as good as the later in my cycle, and it's typically around those times when estrogen is low. Then, we kind of want to think about, yes, we need to modulate that inflammatory environment, but I'm thinking more for somebody who's had children, if that's what they want, and they're maybe more towards that time in their life where estrogen is on the lower side. Sometimes having estrogen as a hormone replacement therapy, ideally a body identical estrogen, could be something that could help with symptoms. And that's something I'm not really qualified to advise on in too much detail, but it's definitely something you could talk to your doctor about.
This is wonderful, and I'm so grateful to you for sharing all of this, and I will be watching this a couple of times because I really do want to understand this better, and it's going to take a while for it all to absorb. So if we really talk about people, what are the most important things if you're facing a condition like ME/CFS? What would be the biggest takeaways from this?
I would say support the whole body first. Actually do what you need to do for the ME/CFS. So that might look different, for different people. I think everybody has their things that work really well for them, but you want to be thinking about your whole body, and I think that stress and inflammation are going to be the big ones. So do what you need to do to support your whole body. And then if you're still experiencing a lot of hormonal symptoms, something that people could consider doing would be to do some testing with an appropriately qualified practitioner. So here in the UK, we have the Dutch test, which I think it's a US-based laboratory, so I'm sure you have it in America as well. They're pretty much the leading lab when it comes to hormone testing. And a Dutch test, for example, can give you an idea of your hormone profile. It can also give you an idea of how well you are detoxifying, and you can see if those pathways need support. But if that's just whoa, okay, too much information, I just need something simple, then I would go back and just to those prior recommendations, which would be maybe supplement with some GLA. B6 and magnesium can be good for hormones as well, and those are pretty safe to take. Obviously, if you're on any medications, talk to your doctor about nutrient medication interactions before you take anything. And just a good multi with some antioxidants might be good as well.
This has been a ton of information, and although I am tempted to just sit here and pick your brain all day long, I think we might overwhelm people. This is probably a really good foundation, a good starting place for information. If people wanted to learn more, or could you tell us a bit as we wrap up a bit about the work that you do to support people with their health journeys and where they can learn more about that?
Yeah, so I work one-on-one with clients, who have chronic illnesses, whether that's autoimmunity, CFS, ME, or any kind of stress-related illnesses. I do, one-off consultations for people who need direction, or I do longer coaching packages where I'm supporting them and holding their hand through all the various changes that need to be made as you navigate, something like a chronic illness. I do offer hormone testing, and I can give advice on supplementation. So if there's anything that we've talked about today that's piqued your interest in that regard, then you can always reach out to me. I'm happy to help. It might actually also be worth mentioning, I've got an ebook which I made on hormones, and it's pretty comprehensive. It goes into everything in a lot of detail. It's not a free ebook, but you can purchase it off my website, and it's £7.99, so it's not a massive investment, but you will get a wealth of information. Maybe too much, but you'll definitely get a lot that you can work through.
Wonderful. And you are quite active and you have an amazing account on Instagram as well. So if people want to follow you, where can they find you there?
So I am Anna_Marsh_nutrition on Instagram, and my website is annamarsh.co.uk. I'm pretty active on Instagram, so yeah, I do share a lot of information and tips, and you'll definitely not be lost for more things that you can learn.
Great. And this, as always, will all be linked in the video description. So people watching, I highly encourage you to click on those and check them out. Anna is just incredible. I have so much gratitude for you, Anna, taking the time to do this, a second video. You are a wealth of information, and it's just incredible to have you here. Thank you so much.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I hope to have you back again. I'm going to keep inviting you and see how many times I can get you to do this.
Please do. I'm more than happy.
And for people watching, if you enjoy these types of videos, I have a playlist on my channel. I'll link it up on the screen here somewhere that is all just expert interviews covering a range of topics and how they relate to conditions like ME/CFS. So yes, thank you again, Anna. Thank you everyone who is watching. Looking forward to your questions and comments under the video. And that is it for today. I'll see you in the next video.